So hello everyone, I'd like to now officially welcome you to today's webinar, Coach Your VISTA to Success. My name is Jessica Birch and I'm with the Corporation for National and Community Service with AmeriCorps VISTA, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of this session. Also joining us are Bethany Dusablin and Jenny Farrell from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You'll see them in the chat and the Q&A to help address questions that you may have during the session. So today's session, Coach Your VISTA to Success. So success can mean a lot of different things, and that kind of seems like a tall order here. I do want to loop back to the question that we posed to you while you waited. How do you define success? So thank you all for posting into the chat what you define as success. We did have a lot of responses here. Kristen said that she defines success as a meaningful experience, that the VISTA member experiences personal and professional growth, achieving performance measure targets, or providing feedback and recommendations to change the target. I also love Melissa's here. She says, if digging ditches makes you happy and you can sustain the lifestyle you want for yourself and your family, then dig those and enjoy life. If you're happy, then you are truly successful. And another one that stood out here was from Melissa. She said, for our program participants, we've replaced the word success to phrase meaningful success. There is no set prescription for success. It is determined by each person's own path and what's meaningful to him or her. So success has a lot of different things. You know, what makes you happy? Did you reach those targets? What does meaningful success mean to you? So there's a lot of different things. And so with this webinar, Coaching Your VISTA Members to Success, we really want to talk about your role in their success. And so the first thing that we want for you to get out of this webinar is for you to define what it means to be a manager and a coach and how to identify the benefits of being a coach, which is, as you'll hear from our presenter today, is different than being a boss or different than being a manager. We hope that you can also apply the skills that we teach you today in engaged listening and asking good questions. And also we hope that you can identify the ways to give and receive feedback, including building an awareness around those barriers to receiving feedback, which, you know, can be a struggle. Sometimes we don't want to always receive feedback, so we're going to help you there so that you can coach your VISTA members to success. So that is a perfect segue for me to introduce our main speaker today. Our main speaker here is Mike Beebe. Mike decided to take his passion for leadership development training and start Leadership for Change training and consulting in 2004. Since then, he has worked with thousands of individuals and groups to help develop their leadership skills. Mike has over 20 years of experience managing youth and adult leadership programs and is passionate about partnering with young people to create positive social change. His experience includes directing Penny Harvest Seattle, which is a youth philanthropy and service learning program. He also has Just Serve AmeriCorps, which is a youth anti-violence program, Teen Link, a hotline for youth answered by youth, and he also serves on the board of directors for Collage, which stands for Children of Lesbians and Gays Everywhere, which is a national organization advocating for the rights of GLBT families. Mike has also been a part of a national team of VISTA trainers and facilitators, and we're happy to have him here today as our key presenter. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's really going to go ahead and get us started. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful introduction, and hello to everybody across the country, lovely VISTA supervisors. Thank you for joining us today. I want to pause for a moment before we dive into the content to learn a bit about you and your experience supervising VISTA members. Please take a minute to answer our poll question. How comfortable do you feel responding to member challenges?
Thank you, Mike. So yeah, to start that poll, or how comfortable, there's no right answer here. You know, maybe you've never had to respond to one, and all I have to say to you is lucky you. And maybe some of you have had to deal with this a lot and feel very comfortable. So just go ahead and fill out that poll here, and we'll kind of see where people are. Mike, do you have a thought about where you think most people fit into this?
Well, I'm looking at the numbers, so it's an unfair advantage, but it looks like a lot of folks are somewhat comfortable. So I'm also guessing we've got a fairly humble crowd because we don't have a lot rating themselves as very comfortable. But yeah, I'd go for we'll land a majority in B, somewhat comfortable.
All right.
But we want some in C and D because I'll feel more helpful that way.
True. No, that's very true. And the poll has ended, so even though you can see the results, I can't. So this is all like suspense for me. We're going to see where everyone is at.
Okay.
I think, I don't know if comfortable. Comfortable is always a difficult word when it comes to challenges. You know, is there really ever a comfort to that? But we'll see where everyone is.
We've got, looking at poll results here, we've got 24% answered very comfortable, and it looks like 45% and somewhat comfortable, 3% not comfortable, and then D, I'm not sure if I ever responded to a member challenge, we've got 8%. Okay, and then no answer, we've got 20% in the no answer. So we've got a lot of room to grow in this group. We've got some folks that I'd love to hear. Those are very comfortable. What makes it work? Hopefully we'll hit some of those high points in this presentation today. So when you registered for today's webinar, many of you shared member challenges you experienced or are currently experiencing. Well, we won't be able to discuss all of these challenges. Some common themes arose that I want to make sure to address. As Jessica mentioned, I have worked over 25 years directing nonprofit programs, supervising staff, VISTA members, and volunteers. In my role as a VISTA supervisor, I have personally experienced many of the challenges you shared when registering for this webinar. And I have heard and observed many of the challenges that come up between VISTAs and their supervisors in my current role as a trainer and coach. I know when I first got started supervising VISTA members, I felt a bit lost on how to be effective when challenges came along. Through hands-on experience and helpful training, I became more confident in my supervisory skills. Today, I'm honored to get to share some of my perspective on what I found effective in addressing VISTA member challenges. So as we look at some of the challenges that you experienced, you listed the following, at least these are ones that came up frequently. One, this is my VISTA member's first job and they lack professionalism. So challenges related to your VISTA member being new to the workforce or being new to the office culture and professional barriers. Second one we saw frequently, my VISTA is doing everything wrong, but I don't know how to tell them. So challenges related to a VISTA not having the skills necessary to complete certain tasks. Three, my VISTA member seems unmotivated. So we've got challenges related to a VISTA member who may seem unmotivated. And then finally, it's unclear how much responsibility my VISTA member is ready for, so challenges related to delegating in different roles of a supervisor. So let's start with that first one. This is my VISTA member's first job. And we say here, think of yourself as a coach. So some VISTA members, will define what a coach is here in a moment, but some VISTA members may be just entering the workforce for the first time. In fact, this could be their first full-time job. One of my supervisees once told me she had never had to manage her own time using a calendar before, and it's really blew my mind that she hadn't had to do that yet. I had no idea that the basic organizational skills I've always used could be foreign to a new employee. As supervisors, it's important to think of ourselves as a coach. What does this member need to be successful in their first job? The coaching supervisor can respond effectively to member challenges through the use of key skills such as listening, inquiry, and giving and receiving feedback. Supervising is all about communicating, asking questions, clarifying expectations, and providing feedback to foster a productive work relationship. It's also about creating a shared understanding of projects, timelines, direction, and vision to ensure that your member meets your expectations. Likewise, your relationship with your member is about collaborating to maximize outcomes, which you can do better together. A good portion of our webinar today is going to focus on how to be an effective coaching supervisor. The coaching supervisor increases their effectiveness by understanding key concepts from the situational leadership model. The situational leadership model offers a helpful framework for understanding when coaching is most needed by our VISTA members. As we understand better the level of experience and competence our VISTA members have with specific tasks, the more easily we can adapt our leadership style to meet their needs. This model was developed in the late 60s by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard at Ohio University and became well known in the 80s when Ken Blanchard published his popular book, Leadership and the 1-Minute Manager. I know when I picked up that book in college, I was a little taken aback by the title. 1-Minute Manager sounds like someone who's just not going to spend much time with me. but it is about a model of efficiency, and we'll see why it's titled as such as I go over it. The model is a process for developing people by providing effective leadership over time so that they can reach their highest level of performance. It is based upon a relationship between an individual's developmental level, so various combinations of competence and commitment on a specific goal or task, and the leadership style, various combinations of directive and supportive behavior that the leader, or you, as a VISTA supervisor, provides. So now we're going to look at some fun graphs, and I'll talk you through them because they don't mean much until I talk you through it. So before I review the situational leadership model in detail, I'd like to remind everyone to refer to the handouts which accompany this webinar. Handouts include a copy of the visuals you will see on this slide and the next. There should be a link posted where you can download that. In fact, I see that on my screen here. It's up and running. I encourage you to download that if you haven't already. Let's start by looking here at the developmental levels in this model. These levels are more easily understood by using a real-life example. Let's take the example of learning to ride a bicycle. In fact, I'm going to share my own story of learning to ride a bicycle. So enthusiastic beginner, at about age 6, or also known as D1, at age 6, I started to learn how to ride a bicycle. I was very excited, high in commitment. I didn't know how to start or stop or balance, so I was very low in competence when it came to riding a bicycle. D2, disillusioned learner. Once I got up on the bicycle, so we're moving from the right of your screen to the left. Once I got up on the bicycle and started pedaling, the inevitable happened. I fell and it hurt. I remember thinking, maybe I don't want to ride my bicycle. I don't like getting hurt. Thus, the disillusioned learner stage. I became low in commitment, excitement waned. I had learned how to do a few things, but still low in competence. And as I practiced, I became a D3, reluctant contributor. I finally learned to ride my bicycle. I could pedal, balance, steer without any help from a parent, or in my case, it was my neighbor who taught me. At that point, I had moderate to high competence and variable commitment because I still wasn't allowed to bicycle off the block. Got a little boring going up and down Elm Street in Oakland, Ohio. So bicycling became less exciting over time since I had been up and down the block thousands of times with my neighbor alongside me. Finally, developmental 4, peak performer. Finally, over time, I was allowed to bicycle throughout my neighborhood on my own. High competence and high commitment. Bicycling on my own is fun. So let's look at our next fun graph, which will tell us a little bit about how you come into the picture as a supervisor, someone learning a new task. This visual shows the 4 leadership styles. Style 1 is directing. You'll see that in the bottom right-hand corner. Style 2 is coaching. You'll see that in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Style 3 is supporting, upper left-hand corner of your screen. Style 4 is delegating, lower left-hand corner of your screen. The goal of situational leadership is to match the leadership style that is appropriate to an individual's developmental level at each stage of development on a specific goal or task. Let's revisit the example of my learning to ride a bicycle to understand the leadership styles better. As an enthusiastic beginner, I was very excited to learn how to ride a bike. I did not need encouragement. However, I did need step-by-step instruction. The leadership style I needed was directing. So it was high directive and low supportive. So this is coaching me on things like how to start and stop, how to balance, so very high directive. I didn't need encouragement. When I fell off the bike, I became a disillusioned learner. The leadership style I needed was coaching, high directive and high supportive. You see that in your upper right-hand corner of your screen. I needed someone who would give me both further instruction on how to ride a bicycle, but also lots of encouragement. A lot of, you got this, you're going to be okay, and also, remember to keep pedaling because you will fall over if you stop pedaling. After I became able to balance and pedal, I became a bit bored and needed another challenge. I needed to be given more independence on how far and fast I bike. The leadership style I was looking for was supporting, low directive, and high supportive behavior. Finally, as a peak performer, I could ride my bike without direction and support. At this point, me and my coach just to adopt the style of delegating. Just tell me I can go outside and ride my bike, low directive and low supportive behavior. So thinking about situational leadership and a successful VISTA, learning this model is very helpful for me in understanding member retention in particular, and where we're most likely to have VISTA members quit service. Here's an example. Your VISTA member is asked to recruit 12 volunteers for the fall volunteer orientation. Only 3 people show up. The member is very frustrated and becomes the disillusioned learner. This member needs a supervisor who is directing. They need to be reminded of specific steps they can talk to more effectively recruit, but they also need a supervisor who shows supportive behavior, pointing out things members did well, giving a pep talk. The disillusioned learner who does not get coaching at this point can get increasingly frustrated and quit. Thinking back to that first challenge of this is my VISTA's first job, it is quite likely that this type of member has low competence in many aspects of their VISTA position. They'll need a very directive approach to supervision, step-by-step instruction. Here's a recommendation we have for you. We'll sit down with your VISTA, look at their VAD together, and identify the developmental level they are at in each major task area. So, for example, if volunteer recruitment is one of those capacity building areas they're working in, have them self-identify where they're at in terms of their developmental level in that arena. Or donor development, partnership building, have them identify, allow your VISTA member first to identify their level of competence and commitment for each major task. Listen and then give your input in terms of what you've seen. An effective situational leader, as you see on your screen, understands how to adapt their style to meet the needs of their members. Let's hear from you all as we think about coaching and coaching our members to success to that D4 ultimately where we can just delegate. So the real work of a supervisor is being an effective coach. Let's hear from you. Think about someone you consider a great mentor or coach. What skills did they have that made them an effective coach? Please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure you send to all participants. We want your comments to be visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not in the Q&A panel further down the screen.
Thank you, Mike. So we're getting some good ones in here. So we have what are some skills? So we do have a listener, someone who listens, someone who provides clear communication, which also could involve listening, someone who's flexible. We also have someone who is fair. I love Tara's here. She says they show you how to fish, not just handing over the fish. So that's great. Yeah, teach me how to do it for myself. I like Jessica's here. She says active listening. Darcy says pushes for continuous growth and is a problem solver from Anthony. These are great. Let's see. We do have a couple of models so that they not only model the target behavior, but they also model trust, which is really key. You know, if you can't trust them, then it's going to be hard to work with them. We have empathetic, someone who's supportive but challenging. Let's see here. That they're a problem solver, a mentor, an encourager. These are great. There's a lot coming in. Mike, did you see any other ones that stood out to you?
Oh, I see that M word, which to me means micromanaging, empowers without micromanaging. I think that situational leadership model really helped me understand what micromanaging meant, and we usually apply that when someone tries to give us very specific direction in something we already know how to do. I would be probably pretty weirded out if someone tried to tell me how to balance my bike right now. I've been riding for, a few decades now. I might call them a micromanager.
True, and I love...
between support and pushing for growth, yeah, a lot of great, you can see my strengths and trust me to do the task even if I fail. Great, I think what we're going to cover today is going to mirror a lot of what's being put into the comments here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your responses. Now, I'd like to ask a second question you see posted on your screen in the chat. How is a coach different than a manager? We said we would define this, so we're going to ask you to define it first. How is a coach different than a manager? We need both. We're not asserting one's better than the other. We need both, but how do we define the difference?
Yeah, and Mike, as you mentioned, that's the one who put in here, they're empowers without micromanaging. So I think, that's one of the keys there is a coach empowers you, but a micromanager, could be a little different. Managers can be good things, they're not bad things. Tara here, she says the coach inspires and they lay out a game plan. We also have that they motivate and inspire. That's a big one.
Oh, I like this. Manager's task-oriented, coach is person-oriented. I think we'll see a theme in the content that we're going to go over of that. Yeah.
I love this. I love how Greg says they're a cheerleader too. That's true. I feel like that's exactly what a coach is, a cheerleader. And kind of going along what you just said, Jamie says that a manager assigns tasks and a coach encourages growth.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Role models.
Karen here says that they're role models, which is, yeah, that's definitely a similarity between the two. Coach and a manager can be someone who can be a role model, can model that behavior, model that trust. That's a great similarity between the two.
This is interesting to me. Anthony says a manager is more professionally based and less personal. A coach is a mentor and also assists with personal problems and professional capacity. Sure, I can see that.
I like this. Karen says a coach brings out something in a team player that they don't know exists.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if folks want to keep typing in, they can, but I want to move ahead. I loved reading what you saw about the differences between a coach and a manager. And we want to stress we need good managers. Managers are great, as many of you said, at timelines, reporting, directives. They handle, as someone used the word professional to me, that is staying on time, turning in reports, evaluations. As you think about the situational leadership model, managers are great for the enthusiastic beginners because they need explicit direction, step-by-step instruction. And they're also great, so that's D1, and they're also great for D4, the peak performers, because good managers, or bosses as we sometimes call them, are good at giving directions and at delegating. So we definitely need our managers. And then it's the coaching skills, though, that really help an enthusiastic beginner, that D1, develop into the peak performer, someone we can delegate to. So let's talk more about coaching. The three key skills of a coaching supervisor, and many of you named these already, thank you for that, are listening, inquiry, and giving and receiving feedback. I'm going to start with a discussion on listening, specifically engaged listening, and it's important to a successful coach. You'll see, I'm pulling a lot of this material out of a great book called Coaching Skills for Nonprofit Managers. You'll see a visual of that book here. You'll also get this in a bibliography we're sending to you in the resource packet. So I highly recommend that. But here are types of listening. They identify in this book 4 types of listening that supervisors commonly do. Perhaps you'll see yourself in these, as I have seen myself in these as well. And maybe I did each of these about 3 times this morning with my 4-year-old daughter. Superficial listening. I'm listening to you, but I'm distracted with my own thoughts. I don't hear you. In this situation, it's really all about me. Yeah, I definitely did that one with her this morning. Embarrassed to say so, but it's true. Self-referential listening. I'm listening to you, but I will nudge the conversation, so now it becomes all about me. I know as someone who has worked decades in nonprofit management, I sometimes like to tell stories about my experiences. And I think there's a role for that doesn't really help someone gain their own skills if we're trying to coach them and reference their own learning. So that's not really listening, that's turning it back on me. Fix-it listening. I'm listening to you, but I want to fix your issue by myself. In this situation, it's really all about me in relation to you. One of the interesting facts in this book that this book shared was that we actually get a little rush out of problem solving or fix it. There's a release of serotonin when we problem solve. And so this is human and natural to do fix-it listening, but it also isn't what we're really aiming for as a coach, engaged listening. As we turn to the next slide here, you'll see the definition of engaged listening. It's the bedrock of coaching. It's a full attention listening with focus on the person you're coaching without a reference to yourself. It is respectful and purposeful. Goes beyond trying to understand what people say. It focuses on what they mean, and sometimes even more important, what is meant by what is left out of the conversation. And aspirational, but in my best moments, I can do that. I can do that well, but I often have to aim for it. So second, skill coaching, inquiry, the art of asking good questions. As we listen to our VISTA members, we of course know that being able to ask good questions will help us get to what's important. Use closed-ended questions to gather information. Use open-ended questions to open up conversation, to explore multiple possibilities, to allow your VISTA member to lead the conversation. Open-ended questions sometimes can be too open. Example, how are you? Typical answer, fine. okay, that's a social norm we engage in. I'd probably get pretty exhausted if every time someone asked me how I was, they expected me to just reveal exactly how I was feeling in that moment. But in a coaching conversation, we do want to ask questions that help vistas go beyond the one-word answers. Instead of how are you, perhaps what was the highlight of your weekend, or what did you do last night? Why questions can put people on defensive. Try using what questions instead. For example, instead of why did you choose to do it that way, what led you to that choice? On a rare occasion, we might ask a why question when we have a really good rapport with our VISTA. Perhaps we are writing a grant together and we purposely want to think critically about why a funder would fund us. So imagine we are in the shoes of the funder. Generally speaking, though, why questions can be using what and feels much like a question asking us to prove ourselves. Back to you all. Let's hear from you on some of the open-ended questions you have used in conversations with your VISTAs or colleagues. Please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure you send to all participants. We want your comments to be visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel and not the Q&A panel further down the screen.
All right, so we're getting some questions in here already. So what are those open-ended questions? We have one here that says, tell me about your volunteer experiences. It's a wonderful question. Sherry here says, what do you think the next step should be? We also have, what would be the most efficient, best, or easiest way to get this done? Let's take a look here. What tools are you using to organize your workload and manage expectations? A lot of these are great. Like, how would you like to move forward? What do you think is the best solution? How do you think we should manage this? It's looking to that future and allowing them to answer those questions. What are solutions to said challenges? This one, you know, what management style do you prefer? They said that they've asked this of their interns, so that's a great question as well. This is a good one. I know here in our office, it's sometimes hard. We have a very open office landscape. Karen here says, what are your thoughts on how we could make your work environment more conducive to focus? So these are some wonderful questions. Mike, did you see anyone else? I know there's a lot coming in here.
You know, how does that direction feel for you? Good. By the way, it's great to explore both feelings and thoughts. So that's one of the things I like about that we are whole human beings that have both. Sometimes in workplaces we think we're not supposed to discuss feelings. I actually feel differently. What interpersonal and technical skills do you bring to the job? Great to assess what they're already bringing. What do you need from me? Good. Great. With some of these you'll actually see on the next slide here some examples of these good questions. We highly recommend you have your go-to questions. Next slide, please. All of these sample questions are open-ended in that they require more than just a yes or no answer. All are open but do have a direction, such as what's most important for us to talk about, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that I find is really good when you feel your buttons pushed by a comment. And then often when we ask what they really meant by that word or words that might have felt offensive, we get something that expands our understanding and allows us not to go into conflict mode. What options are you considering? What worked? What did you find challenging? What would you do differently next time? What do you think are our next steps? One that I didn't type up on this slide, but just tell me more is a great one when you're wanting to learn more. So all are open, but do have a direction. A really effective coach can help their vistas find their own answers to challenges by simply asking good questions. Thank you for your contributions, everyone. Now we're going to move into a framework for giving feedback, and we're going to look at both appreciative feedback, which is that I've got good things to say about you and what you're doing, and developmental feedback, which is, okay, often called constructive criticism. And both of those feedback models that we're pulling from the coaching skills book here are grounded in objective observation. So we're going to discuss each of these three types in more depth as we address additional member challenges. I find it helpful to start with me and thinking about what has worked for me and getting feedback. And it's often easier to think about those times I got it when it was not helpful. I have to say my brother gives me an unending a list of examples of unhelpful feedback. I hope you're not on this call, Dave. But I won't go into the details of those, but think of a time, often it's our family week, think of these examples. Think of a time you received feedback that was not helpful. What did you find about it that was unhelpful? And go ahead and type some of those things in. Usually not too hard to draw examples of these. Anything, what did they do or say? What was your tone? Other nonverbal communication, remember? Where were you?
Yeah, so we have some coming in here. So someone here said that it was an opinionated comment, and there was no alternative solution shared. So it kind of sounds like, well, that wasn't done right. It's like, well, what else could I have done? Like, help me out here. Or the answer was vague. So no real kind of understanding of how to make it better, really what went wrong or was not helpful. Let's see. Biased feedback, very general feedback. Someone here said that they got feedback that said, that's not how we usually do it.
Oh, the classic. I've heard that a few times in the workplace.
Yeah.
I've said it twice.
Yeah, something similar that, like, you're not supposed to be doing blank. Feedback was given by the staff. And this one I find kind of to be sassy is I knew that would happen. Like, oh.
Yeah, know it all.
Yeah. And unrelated feedback is another one here. So, yeah, not helpful if we're not talking about that topic or what was going on.
We told you not to do it that way.
Yeah. Kind of like the whole I knew that would happen, kind of a giant I told you so.
So let's think more positively now. I think, I'm seeing some of what we're going to cover in terms of this is teasing out the difference between interpreting a behavior and naming the behavior. And so let's think of a time when you received helpful feedback from a coworker, supervisor, or colleague. What about that feedback did you find helpful? Please either type into the chat box or raise your hand to answer this question. And about a time you received helpful feedback from a coworker, supervisor, or colleague. Again, what about that feedback did you find helpful? What did they do, say, or suggest? How did they give the feedback? While you're typing, I'll share one short story. I was presenting in person rather than over webinar, but in person I was presenting to a group of VISTAs actually, and we had a break, and one of the VISTAs came up to me and said, Mike, I'm really enjoying your presentation, but could I just give you a little feedback? By the way, hot tip, ask if you can give the feedback. And he shared with me that he showed me with his hand, but what he showed me was that I was rattling coins in my pants pockets throughout the presentation. And it was very distracting, he said. Very helpful feedback. He was very specific. And then I knew it has caused me now, even though you can't see this, I have emptied my pockets even for this webinar, so I can't rattle coins, because you would probably pick up that noise even over the speakerphone here. So let's hear from you. What are some of the things that were helpful in your experience?
Yeah, so we have a lot coming in here. So Tara said that someone who gave her feedback said they highlighted what went well, what to repeat for next time, and then politely suggested what to kind of ditch that didn't really work well. So that's great. The good things, what should happen next time, and what can be changed. Rebecca said something of the sandwich, which I know, Mike, you and I have talked about before. Good thing about me, the meat, what I need to work on, and another good thing, or note of encouragement, also known to Rebecca as the soft bread. I like that.
Soft bread, okay.
Soft bread. It helped me when you blank, so that positive feedback there. They were direct, they were specific. Let's see. So someone here said that someone gave them feedback of stop interrupting me when I'm speaking. They said that I didn't even know I did that, and I was glad that I learned this in my 20s. Yeah, nothing's worse than doing something for a long time and no one tells you, and then they tell you later. Please, I don't want to be doing this for 6 months. Please tell me that you don't like it. Let's see here. It was helpful when a person acknowledges that they may not have communicated their expectations properly or given good direction. So that is a good thing. That is, instead of, just saying, hey, well, you didn't do this right, like, hey, maybe I didn't explain it well enough. This is what could have done better. So yeah, these are some great ways that you've done.
To everyone, we'll kind of come back to some of these as we go over the model we're going to share for giving feedback, but I think it mirrors a lot of what we're going to suggest. One thing I'd like to share, and this is from another favorite book of mine called Thanks for the Feedback, The Art and Science of Receiving Feedback. You'll see a visual by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And you're seeing 3 triggers, and these triggers are referring to when we get, especially when we get, usually it's when we get constructive criticism or developmental feedback that we find we get defensive. And they interviewed thousands of people in workplaces across the country and found they kind of fell into these 3 triggered categories that got the things, the barriers to getting in the way of us receiving feedback. And their suggestion is that when we work on noticing these triggers, that we can get better at receiving feedback, and the most effective way to get better at giving feedback is to get better at receiving it ourselves. We model it for our staff. So let's look at these 3 triggers. Truth. I have this sense that, and we've all had these moments, and I've had it very recently actually, the feedback is wrong, unfair, unhelpful. So I just throw out any useful shred of it because they've said something that just isn't simply not true, and I can prove it. And so I get in defensive posture around that. Relationship, I can't hear this feedback from you. So depending on the person, I kind of jokingly refer to my brother, but let's bring it back to the workplace because family, we know, can trigger us in all kinds of ways. I had a favorite supervisor that in a leadership change was asked to leave, and an interim supervisor came in who happened to be the person who made that suggestion that my favorite supervisor leave. And they were in my boss role. I used that in this case. And they had a lot of feedback for me that I had trouble hearing at first because I didn't really trust their decision making. I thought they had made a poor decision. As it turned out later, it actually learned and grew a lot from some of the guidance I got from the supervisor, but it was hard for me at first. Identity, the feedback is threatening and I'm off balance. So in my case, I make my living doing facilitation and training, and so sometimes when I get somebody giving me feedback about how I could improve my facilitation skills, for example, I get worried that, well, maybe I'm just in the wrong profession. I've been doing this for a living, and here I'm still doing things wrong. So my identity is shaken, so I can't integrate the feedback. So their suggestion is that, 1, notice the triggers, and then can we make a shift for how we receive them? If we look at the next slide, the key is to maintain some curiosity as I'm experiencing my triggers happening. I know, easier said than done. I find that classic advice of taking a deep breath to work real well, and then asking, can you tell me more about, so shifting from that's wrong, oh, I love that visual, cross out that's wrong, so that's wrong is wrong, and shift to tell me more. Can you tell me more about what you meant when you said ... You know, and the feedback story I shared, rattling coins was a pretty clear example, but if they just had told me I was doing distracting behavior, I'd be like, can you tell me more about what behavior I was doing that was distracting? So you're shifting from that's wrong to tell me more. Another piece, a gem that I pulled from this book was in asking for feedback to just focus on one thing at a time. And so I use this in both, asking for things to improve and also things I'm doing well. And you'll see on the screen what's one thing I could change that would make a difference. I can remember one thing, I can integrate, process, and take action on one thing. You can also ask, what's one thing you see me doing that gets in my own way? And or what's one thing I could change that would make a difference to you, as you see on your screen? Or what's one thing you see me that I'm doing that is working well for you on our team? Again, easier for someone giving the feedback to just name one thing, and also easier for you as the receiver of the feedback to just be able to integrate one thing at a time. I have used that over and over, and it's been so helpful in my work, both on the end of being a trainer, but also in my day-to-day work with teams. So, hot tip. Some of you said this, someone said this earlier already in your comments. If you haven't already discussed with your staff how they like to receive feedback, immediately put that on your to-do list. When I started doing this, it made my job so much easier. It's like, believe it or not, I'm not someone who relates to getting feedback over email, but I have had staff who like it in writing. I would say please come to me in person, but let's honor people's preferences. Let's honor their preferences. So put this on your to-do list. Let's look at another member challenge that you mentioned. My VISTA member is doing everything wrong. Okay, this gets into our first skill around objective observation. Strong coach aims to be objective. As many VISTAs are learning new skills in a new workplace, it can be easy to jump into evaluation of a member's performance too quickly. A strong coach aims to be objective. To do so, we need to be able to name the behaviors we're seeing and resist the temptation to evaluate, interpret, or judge the behavior when talking to them. This is where I like to say it's human to evaluate, interpret, judge, but the idea is separate out. How can I name the behavior that led me to that interpretation? So here's a definition of objective observation. Articulate what you see without interpretation, evaluation, or judgment. We become more effective when we can start with the observation. So we're going to keep coming back to that point. Here's an example. Harriet, evaluation. Harriet has been talking too much and taking up too much time in meetings. Here's observation without evaluation. Harriet spoke 5 times during the last meeting in comparison to other staff who spoke once or twice. I also noticed she spoke an average of 4 minutes, while other comments were 1 minute or less. Okay, I know that's very specific, but it's like a new muscle to practice. So if I am needing to give Harriet some feedback about her talking too much, I can actually ground that in some real facts about what we saw or heard in the meeting. So here's some tips. Focus on the person's behavior. Get specific and note exactly what the person said or did. Ask yourself, would other people see or hear what I saw or heard? And this is the one that I find really helpful. Pretend you are taking a video of that person and then playing it back. What would you see or hear? Say what you observed without judgment. Okay, challenge 3. My VISTA member is unmotivated. A strong coach can motivate through positive and constructive feedback. No, this statement, my VISTA member is unmotivated, is an evaluation. Step back from that evaluation and take note of the behaviors that you have assigned to being unmotivated. Have you had a conversation about how motivated they are or not? Perhaps they're motivated but are not receiving the support they need to be successful at tasks. VISTAs who are developing their skills will need more direction in order to become motivated. Also, a strong coach can motivate through positive and constructive feedback, whereas the coaching skills book refers to appreciative and developmental feedback. This is an interesting statistic pulled out of the coaching skills book. People get on average only a couple minutes of positive feedback each year versus thousands of hours of negative feedback. David Rock from the Quiet Leadership book provided that information. And I also know oftentimes that positive feedback is given, but in very generic behavior. So we're going to talk about how do we get more specific about that. Here's a formula for it. Observation of behavior, appreciate the positive impact of that behavior, equals supporting and encouraging of current behavior. Let's look at some specific examples of how to use this formula. Okay, here's one I'm guilty of saying a lot. Great job. Again, I do that a lot with my daughter too. Then I remember my training and think, how can I be more specific? Nice work on that proposal. Well-meaning, but could be more effective. Too often our feedback is very generic. The more specific we can be, the more effective our feedback is in reinforcing those positive workplace behaviors and ultimately in helping amplify their strengths, allowing us as supervisor to increase the capacity of our programs. Let's look at an example here. Reminder, at this point, again, we have posted in the chat box a link to a worksheet to help you in preparing to give appreciative feedback. Here are some suggested steps. Start with the observation. What positive action, behavior, or demonstrated quality did you observe? Example, great job can become, I noticed over 20 people attended the volunteer orientation. Step 2, reflect back on your observation based on facts. Now you've created acknowledgement, I see you. Example, that is twice as many people as our last volunteer orientation. Step 3, communicate what the behavior means to you or the impact that it has made to the team, project, or organization. When you add this appreciation to your acknowledgement, you give meaning to that person's behavior. Example, I am so excited by what this means for our clients. We will serve twice as many people. Thank you for your hard work at turning people out for this orientation. Your hard work at outreach paid off. Now let's talk about developmental feedback. It's a similar formula. But also what we often, or at least I as supervisor, I often feel reluctant to do, but it's so important. This is what supervisors typically find most challenging. You notice here that the suggestion is always to begin with the objective observation. The formula here, much like appreciative feedback, is observation plus impact of behavior, and here's the add-on, plus a request for the future equals improved behavior and performance. So here's an example. Observation. John, I noticed that our last 3 Monday morning 9 a.m. team meetings that you have arrived after 9:20 a.m. Please note, it's really important here to make sure this is fact, not arguable. Even saying they were late suggests an interpretation or evaluation. You want to start with observation and just make sure you have agreement on that. Impact of behavior. I'm concerned that you're missing out on valuable information and also miss out on some of the relationship building you're doing on our staff team. Be careful about describing your impact by not interpreting the behavior as disrespectful. I often hear this come up, being late is just disrespectful. That's subjective. What means respect to you may mean something very different to your VISTA. Requests for future. I want to remind you that attendance at these staff meetings is a very important part of your year of service. I would like to request that you arrive by 9 a.m., and if you're going to be late, please text me. I recommend you do this as a conversation, allowing your VISTAs to react to what you're saying. That you might get more information in that conversation that steers us a different direction. Let's go over some tips for developmental feedback, much like we did with the appreciative. Again, posted in the chat box is a link to a worksheet to help you in preparing to give developmental feedback. I love that worksheet, by the way. I recommend downloading that and keeping that handy, a bunch of copies of it at your desk. Hopefully you won't need it too often, but very helpful. So step one, or tip one, use the developmental feedback handout to write down the key things you want to say, especially when the stakes are high, so prepare. 2, check your attitude. Can you set aside anger, resentment, frustration you have? If not, wait until you can. 3, ask permission to give your feedback if the situation allows. Timing is everything. There's just something really nice about being asked. And sometimes I want to say no, but often it's just a nice courtesy. Next tip, address one issue at a time. Resist the urge to deal with multiple issues at once. Pick the most urgent when there are many. Do not blame. Stay on track. Be easy to go off track and discuss other angles. Keep on track. Check it out. There are 2 sides to every story. Do have a conversation, not a lecture. Ask their perspective. And then finally, help the person move forward. Do leave with some tangible next steps you both will take. Okay, I've been talking a while. Let's go back to you. I want to give you a chance to talk through what you would say in a scenario. Get an opportunity to practice our feedback. For this activity, you can either hit *1 on the phone to answer verbally, and our operator will be able to open your line, or you can type your answer in chat. It is not unusual for this challenge, I'll read as well in a moment, to come up about professionalism in the workplace. How do you have a conversation with John about what it means to be professional in the workplace? How does your org define professional? Let me read this just so we have it verbally and on screen here. You're worried that John has not been professional in his interaction with clients. He's sharing a lot of personal information that goes beyond what most staff and volunteers tend to share with clients in your organization. Clients love Joe and now seem to expect other staff to share similar information. What do you say to Joe when you sit down to a meeting with him? Does anyone want to share what you came up with? Again, you can hit *1 and answer verbally, or you can type your response in the chat box and we'll read it out.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we know this is a tricky one. This is a little bit of a tricky question. As Mike said, if you want to answer over the phone, press *1, and we'll talk with the operator, and we can have you answer verbally, or you can type in the chat. Even if you don't know how the whole conversation would go, how would you start it, or what's one thing you want to talk about when you talk with Joe? Yeah, like we said, there's no right or wrong here. Just want to see how you would talk to them. So we do have the first one here, Mike, is Elise says, I would thank John for his passion for the clients and say that it's clear that he loves to work with them. So, acknowledging that, his heart's in the right place, that that he really cares about the people that he's serving. That's a great way to start it off. Rebecca here says, I think it's great that, she would say, I think it's great that you have a good rapport with clients. However, these are the reasons X, Y, and Z that we keep things private. So maybe, talk about the policies and procedures as to the reasons why it's not necessarily appropriate to share all that information.
Yeah, these are good.
And let me.
We didn't give you what he's sharing, but I'd love to hear thoughts about how you might identify those things. Or maybe we're going to get them in the next comments here. I'd probably stress the importance of boundaries with clients and acting more like their friend might impact their ability to become self-sufficient. And Joe's ability to work, and the screen is going, it's good, right, good ability to become self-sufficient, and Joe's ability to work successfully with clients long-term. That way he could identify his self-interest in cutting back on personal service. Great, yeah. Joe, I see you successfully been engaging with clients. That's terrific. However, there's a delicate balance between what to share with clients and maintaining professionalism. I was sharing some techniques I use to engage with clients to gain trust. Good. Oh, I like this. Is now a good time? I'd like to talk with your interactions with clients. Is now a good time at getting permission? I'm concerned with your interactions with clients setting a precedent that is not in line with our mission. Okay. I've had a great response with clients. You may not realize it's creating unrealistic expectations for other interactions. Obviously, passion is as important. I think also important that we are consistent in how we deal with our clients. How can we keep your passion in a relationship while maintaining important boundaries? Good open-ended question with enough specificity that Joe could respond. I've had this happen many times, says Kenny. I would tell them we need to talk about observations, but I understand his desire to build a rapport with clients that I had the same issues when I was young. It's difficult. Yeah, good.
And let me
what he views his role with the client, clarify role and information that is public and what is not. Great. I imagine mayors where he could pull in, oh, I overheard you say this, I overheard you say that. Let's talk about why or why not, or what about that may be professional or not professional. Define boundaries. It's a great time to revisit policies, procedures, but we want them to also understand why they're there in the first place.
And let me quickly go. Doreen, do we have any people who called in over the phone?
Thank you, Jessica.
This time I'm showing no one queued up.
Great, thank you.
Well, good. I appreciate everybody's typing in your responses. Just to reiterate, and again, we didn't give you what he was actually sharing, but at least it's super critical in this scenario that we actually pull out. I know I've done a lot of youth development work, a lot of work with staff who are working with homeless youth, working with youth who've been marginalized in a lot of different ways, and we're trying to grapple with that question about what's professional. Often a way of connecting with young people and clients in general is to share personal stories. But I find sometimes the VISTA, or actually AmeriCorps members in this case, like supervisors, may want to share their own stories of drug and alcohol use. It was a common one, and there'd be a way that would create this more of a friend-like relationship, and that was not appropriate for their role. And so being able to be specific, when you shared that story of getting drunk on Friday nights, I'm concerned that the youth you were working with that day might, whatever impact you might have a concern about. So thank you all for your responses. Again, this is one easier written and talked about than actually doing in action, but I really encourage you to go back to that worksheet and use it next time before you're getting ready for one of those difficult conversations. I think you'll find it really helpful in prepping for that developmental feedback moment. So we want to look at one last challenge, and then we're getting ready to go back to you for some questions and answers pretty soon here. Challenge 4, it's unclear how much responsibility my VISTA is ready for. I think someone even used this language about what a coach does, and they said a strong coach provides a clear playbook or maybe somebody said a clear action plan, very similar in my mind. Learning to delegate to your VISTA member can be a challenge. Like any coach, it's important to provide your VISTA members with explicit goals and expectations. One of the best ways to clarify your goals and expectations and to learn your members' level of readiness for each new task, as we discussed earlier in the situational leadership model, is to have regular one-to-one meetings. We're curious, again, we're not reporting this to anybody, but we're curious, do you have regular one-to-ones with your member? I'd like to learn a little bit about how often you're able to meet. Please respond to the poll question on the right side of your screen. Do you have regular one-to-ones with your member? I see the bars going up on our screen here. Nothing too early to say what the trend is, although I like that yes is in the lead. And I hope it's just not that you're trying to say the right thing on the webinar. We're truly not tracking. We appreciate honesty too. I like that someone answered, what's a one-to-one meeting? Maybe half in joking or not, but I rarely meet with them. I know the reality is that most VISTA supervisors are very busy. I know in my years of supervising VISTA, I'm often juggling many projects. And so it could be hard to hit those weekly meetings, which is what I strive for. But the regularity was sometimes hard, which is the main thing. We really need regularity. Okay, it's looking good. We're got 2 more seconds for the poll to be open here. We've got 32% of you saying yes, I meet regularly with my VISTA. We meet but not regularly. I'd say that's a common thing I hear. I'm glad you meet, so thank you for that. So we've got 11%, and then 1% I rarely meet with my member, and then I think we just had one person say, what's a one-to-one meeting? So probably a lot of you didn't respond to it, which is fine. So let's talk about some best practices. You know, regularity, weekly, bi-weekly, it is truly a must that, you know, you're going to save yourself time in the long run if you make time for that weekly or even bi-weekly check-in with your VISTA members. It's ensure they're getting the support they need. These meetings are the best opportunity to check in and provide guidance to your members. Think of it as structured time to delegate, so that way if you're stressed about time, that this is a time you're going to be able to hand off tasks and then also know where you need to provide more support. Periodically use your meetings as a chance to check in using that situational leadership model on where members are at in their developmental level in the various task areas from their VAD. That should shift over the course of the year. And next, I'd like to share a recommended meeting agenda. So, you know, I forgot, can you go flip back one slide? I forgot a point. The regular meetings, too, are a good time to balance that task and relationship building, which is what that situational leadership model is all about, but it's also balancing manager and coach. Someone said that manager is more of a task-oriented one, coach is more relationship builder. Okay, now I'm ready to go back to that other slide, thank you. Recommended meeting agenda. I'm a big fan of having some also consistency in what we do in meetings. Do a check-in. Sometimes when we dive right into the agenda, people aren't present for the conversation about what we're trying to get done. And then do have outcomes. What do you want to accomplish at this meeting? Do some kind of task review from last week, discuss agenda items for the current week, review schedule of tasks for this week, and then do some kind of closing meeting evaluation. Both the check-in and closing can be quick, but it's just nice to have a chance for opening and for closure to have a chance to check in to see where people are at the beginning and ending of a meeting. When you have many items to discuss, I recommend doing an easy one first and then making your most challenging item second so that you can have adequate time to deal with that. Again, these regular meetings help you gauge where you are in your work and help determine how much responsibility they're prepared for. Oh, I skipped over one tip. I also recommend both supervisors and members set the agenda items ahead of time. If you have not done that, make sure you just take a moment to check in about what is most important to talk about today. But if you can collaborate on that agenda building, it's going to get more ownership and therefore more follow-through. Okay, well, let's look at the resources that we've drawn from today. Great resources here. Coaching Skills for Nonprofit Managers by Judith Wilson and Michelle Gislason. Michelle's out of Seattle and Judith's out of Bay Area. They both work with Compass Point that you see listed there. They are Bay Area in terms of in-person training, but they do have a great email newsletter to get on. I would highly recommend that. And then thanks for the feedback, the science and art of receiving feedback well. That was what we pulled the information about triggers from by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. Just to note, these are my recommendations, not the Corporation for National and Community Service, just to be clear that that's me recommending them. Next steps, we're going to hear from you again in a moment, but incorporate the feedback models we discussed in this webinar when working through challenging conversations with your VISTA. Use those worksheets we sent you. Ask, what is one thing I could do right now to better support you being successful in your year of service? In fact, get off this webinar and ask that if you haven't done that recently. Encourage them to give you feedback and ask them how they like to get feedback. Schedule a one-to-one meeting with your VISTA and look at their VAD. Identify together the developmental level they are at in each of the major task areas. And finally, thank you for letting me spend this time with you. I always love talking to VISTAs and VISTA supervisors. And I'll hand it off to Jessica here.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and thank you all for being on this webinar with us today. So we want to ask a quick question of you. We want to know, now that you've learned some great tips, tricks, and tools for your coaching your VISTA members, what is one thing that you're going to put into practice that you've learned? You know, Mike just talked about next steps. So maybe you're going to set up those one-on-one meetings, or as Mike said, maybe you're going to get off this webinar and figure out how people like to get feedback. So if you want to type into the chat here, what's one thing from today's presentation that you're going to put into practice? It can be something very small. You know, you can aim for the moon, which we love. So let's take a look here. We're getting some good responses. Melissa here, she's going to think like a coach. And Heather is going to do a more appreciative feedback. That's wonderful.
Being a question there, which we should get, I'll get to that in the Q&A. But
definitely, yeah. We're going to do the Q&A here in just like a minute or two. So Jessica, I do have your question marked.
I'm noting it too, so in case they post it again.
Great. So Tara here said she's going to say, she said, I'm adding, how do you want to receive feedback questions to our volunteer handbook? And I'll add that in the meeting overview. That's great. Determine developmental level for each major task. It's wonderful, Andrea. We also have someone who says that they're going to ask what's, not why.
Yay.
Gina's going to talk about a high and a low from last week in the Monday weekly meeting. Fantastic. And Karen here is going to do a more formal agenda that reviews the last week's points in progress. And then we'll end here with Greg. Keep them coming. We love to know what you're going to do. Your fellow supervisors will also love it as well. But Greg here says that they're going to meet as a group and individually. So have those times to all meet, but then also have those one-to-one meetings. That's wonderful. So thank you all for those. Like I said, keep them coming. But what I'm going to put in here now is we want to know what you thought. If you can take just a minute or two to do our quick evaluation, on the right side of your screen you are going to find that poll where you can share feedback about this webinar. So if you could just take a moment and answer them. We do love to be able to improve these webinars. We take directly what you want, what the feedback you give us, to inform what we do for our future webinars. So please fill it out. Please, if you love us, tell us. Please, if you want something different, tell us. We really do take it to heart, and you know, we want to know what you want because we're here to do this for you. So please take a moment to do that. And while you're doing that, we are going to go ahead and get to the question and answer session. I'm going to invite Doreen here on the phone to just remind us how to ask a question over the phone. Doreen, can you let everyone know how to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star then 1. You will be prompted to record your first and last name. To withdraw your request, press star 2. Once again, to ask a question, press star then 1 now.
Thank you. So while we wait for questions to come in over the phone, I am going to start taking some questions that have come in already through the Q&A. So we did have a question here about how can I help my VISTA bridge the shortfalls of a modest VISTA paycheck? So thank you so much for that question. There's a lot of different ways to read into that question by what you mean by bridging the shortfalls. So if we're talking purely about what maybe things that you can provide to your VISTA member to help them with their service, there are limited ways that you as a VISTA supervisor can provide assistance to your members, such as, for example, you may be able to help your VISTA member with housing, and those type of assistance that's allowed can be found in the supervisor handbook or supervisor manual that's on the VISTA campus, and I'll go ahead and post that link in the chat. And that also that talks about that there. We also did do a webinar on different things, different incentives you can provide. But if you do have any specific questions about any specific types of incentives, you can always talk to your state program officer about what you can and cannot provide. I'm not sure if that's kind of the shortfall or the bridging that you were looking for. Mike, from your point of view, with coaching, how would you support your VISTA member knowing that the stipend is so low? How would you, as a supervisor, try to bridge that or try to assist them?
Sure. You know, certainly the monetary is a stress that, you know, I may be able to alleviate by getting coffee every now and then or taking them to lunch. So there's that. But I think one way we do make up a bit, I kind of saw it as kind of extra important for me to take time to give that, especially the appreciative feedback. And so I'm just really conscious of that with my VISTA volunteers especially, as well as all my volunteers, but especially VISTA volunteers. They make quite a commitment. So one gift I can give them that won't pay the rent, but will at least get them more prepared for a job that does pay them well, is to give consistent, both appreciative and developmental feedback and getting good at that. So I'd say apply what we talked about today. You know, I noticed there's this question about closing meeting evaluation. Would it be okay, Jessica, if I just said a few words about that?
Yeah, definitely. Please go on to that question, yes.
Depending on how much time you have, and often I'm pressed for time, I just usually do some kind of, if it's just a couple of us meeting or a staff meeting, and I don't have too many in the group, I do like a go-around checkout, like name one thing you appreciated about the meeting today, and then maybe I do another round. It's like name one thing that you might change. So using that name one thing approach. If it's a longer meeting and we covered a lot of content, I might do kind of a chart with 2 columns, what we call plus delta chart. Plus being on one side, what were things that you liked about the meeting and our training, and delta being things I might change if I had, had more time, or just might change because I didn't think it was that effective. But in the quick 1-hour check-in, it's just like, even a question like, how did you feel about the meeting? Like, and usually you'll get some feedback about, oh, I really wish we got to this agenda item. Oh, but I really like that we spent a good amount of time and that we made this decision together about how to implement the program.
Thank you, Mike, for answering that. Doreen, do we have any questions coming in over the phone?
At this time, I'm showing no questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So there was another question here. I think it came in through the chat, so let me take a quick second to find that. Let's take a look here. So, sorry, I apologize. Keep them coming if you do have questions. We did have another question, Mike. Someone asked, can you give specific examples of the question, how do you want to receive feedback? The VISTA might say in person, by mail, not sure what this means. Do you have like an example of if someone was like, I don't know what you mean, how would you explain that?
Oh, how would I explain it? Well, certainly the list there. The factors I'm thinking about is, do they like a real direct approach, like just lay it on the table, or are they what I call a softer approach where we might use something like the sandwich method, where, oh, I need a little positive with the negative, or negative, I hate to use that word, the growth opportunity, right? I'm also thinking about, do you want it behind closed doors, or are you okay getting feedback in the moment, with others in the room? Do you want it, do you want feedback, are you okay with feedback over email? or what types of feedback are you okay getting over email versus a one-on-one conversation. Having a conversation about, you know, how they usually respond to feedback. So those are the kinds of things. Did I answer that? Is there more to that question? Yeah, again, just giving them opportunity to share, like, you know, what they prefer.
Great, thank you, Mike. We do have another question here, and this is great. So someone here asks, I have trouble balancing being friendly and being respected. Have you come across others with that challenge? And I also want to pose this to the group. Mike, I look forward to your answer, but also, if anybody else here who's a VISTA supervisor has run into this, like, how do you balance being, you know, friendly and, you know, approachable, but still being respected? Please put that in the chat to help answer this question. But Mike, have you run into that challenge, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, I certainly have. I find one of the reasons I love this work is I find that my values align well with VISTA's, and they're generally, you know, people who thankfully do want to change the world for the better, and those are the kinds of people I want to hang out with. You know, I started supervising AmeriCorps members and VISTA members in my 20s, and I'd say my answer has shifted over time. I was pretty ready to go out for happy hour with my AmeriCorps members in my late 20s, and I found that that did create some difficulties, especially when I had to get into disciplinary situations. And so I created a rule for myself that has worked pretty well over the years, that especially with that year cycle, that, you know, maybe late in the year I might start to do something more social like that, but other than all staff social functions when we're all there, I chose to set a boundary around, I'm not going to do that hangout friend thing with my VISTAs or my AmeriCorps member. I supervise both AmeriCorps VISTAs and AmeriCorps State National, and I waited until kind of towards the end of the year. And the biggest reason for that is that every year I had people who had to, you know, go through some kind of disciplinary procedure. I had a team of 40, so just the odds were that I would have it. And I get myself into trouble if I had favorites, and ultimately if you start being friends, you would have favorites, and then it gets messy. So I wait, and what I will say today, some of my best colleagues, and some of them have really entered my friend circle, are now well after the time that I supervised them. They're now some of the people I really go to for, good community organizing, or some of them become friends where we hang out. But that is after service, not usually during. And that's my recommendation. Different things work for different folks and in different cultures. I think trust your instincts, but I'd say err on the side of, at least for a little bit of time, maintaining more of a professional relationship and not a personal until later in the year.
Thank you, Mike.
This is back to our scenario, actually, doesn't it? Around joy and professionalism. And it's certainly another factor to consider with that is like, okay, what story, okay, maybe I'm not going out for a meal or something, but what stories do I share and not share? And, you know, we each are so different as human beings that it's hard for me to say there's one right or wrong with that. You know, I'm kind of keeping a similar standard with them that I might, you know, my colleagues around me, so it's going to look different to each of you.
That's great.
Another one in the chat that maybe you're not seeing, Jessica, how do I establish an open feedback environment right away with the VISTA? And this is Emily Sellers says, I don't have a VISTA yet. I'd like to, so I do all the, with orientation, you're supposed to do one as a VISTA supervisor. And, you know, early on, I think, of course, it's important to go over policies and procedures and whatnot. And I live in Seattle. I'm in Portland at the moment with my friends at Education Northwest. But in Portland and Seattle, we like to go out for coffee. And anymore, our coffee culture has been transported across the country. I like to take them out for coffee and say, hey, let's talk about, you know, what are your pet peeves? Tell me now. What are your bigger than pet peeves? What really pisses you off? What can I do to make sure we have a workplace where I'm not pushing your buttons? And what are your triggers? How do you like to get feedback? And I like to do that over coffee. And in that, I think the best way to establish open feedback is to reveal your own. Like, these are the things that really irritate me. These are the things I like, you know, to have from the people I supervise in the workplace. you know, these are the non-negotiables, these are the negotiables, sharing, being open about that, and that will set a tone for the year. Doing that right away. If you're a really busy supervisor, you don't meet with your VISTA member until a few weeks in, that's going to set a tone too. So I'd say also the immediacy of doing something, as I just said about maintaining professional personal, but something that's a little bit more personal first, just to set open feedback. Doesn't mean we're sharing all of our life stories with them. It's just more a way to connect early on, so we set a tone for the year.
And Mike, we have a question here. It says, how do you do that with 40 people? That's a lot of coffee.
A lot of coffee. Well, you know, I've gotten good at, we talk about in-kind donations during VISTA pre-service orientation. I've gotten good at asking. You can get coffee cards donated, so I've done a little bit of that. And right, I don't take all 42 members out to coffee, or I don't have 42 members on my roster right now, so that's maybe easier. But yeah, it is hard. So I think that person was probably, you know, it's like having a sense of humor about it. But yeah, I don't take every one of them out to coffee because it would be too expensive. And then I have to be fair about it, right? Typically, I've supervised a handful of VISTAs, and then you can do it. But coffee cards, in-kind donations, so that really helps out too. I was lucky enough to work for an organization in Seattle called Solid Ground, and at the time it was Fremont Public Association. They actually provided us with a kind of a coffee fund that was, you know, provided by the organization. It wasn't written into our VISTA grant because I don't think they have a slot for that.
Yeah, I know I need a coffee budget here. I'm going to check in one more time with our operator. Doreen, do we have anybody who's asking a question over the phone?
There are no questions.
All right. Well, it looks like we've gotten through all of your questions here, so I do just want to once again say thank you all for joining us here today, and thank you again, Mike, for providing all this wonderful information. We do want to see you again because we love seeing you, and we want to give you the information that you want. So we sure hope that you can join us for the next webinar that we have, which is going to be next month. It is called Coordinating Data Collection for AmeriCorps VISTA Projects. So we know that reporting is a big topic for you all. So please join us for this webinar on June 22nd. If you do have any other questions, you can always email us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. And thank you again. We hope to see you next time, and thank you again for all the work that you're doing with your VISTA members. Have a wonderful rest of your day.